So I appreciate everyone coming to this talk. I know there was a huge opportunity to go to many different talks and stuff, so I appreciate you coming to this one. So this one is called Removing the Select Stars. So I thought this would pique the DBAs in here who have to deal with the mangled queries and mangled SQL statements that you guys get from your developers. So I was hoping that would pique your interest. So again, silence your phones. I mean, I'm not going to yell at you or kick you out if you don't, but it's just common courtesy. And then we have a lot to offer. Remember, PASS is more than PASS Summit. It's PASS 365, and there's lots of opportunities to learn and network and get knowledge throughout the whole year. So go out to pass.org and find out more. Okay, my name's Chris Woodruff. We'll get through this quick. I work at Quicken Loans. I am a platform strategist, which just is some fancy title. I mostly am trying to herd teams of developers and DBAs into one common vision. So if anyone's looking for a job, we have quite a few openings. If you want to come work for a really good company, we do remote, and we have offices in Detroit, Phoenix, Charlotte, Cleveland, and I think that's it right now. But we do remote. So hit me up if you want to talk about opportunities at Quicken Loans after this talk. So the agenda is, I want to have a chat about developers. So you can ask me questions, you can gripe, you can let out all your frustrations while you're here. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Entity Framework Core and how that affects your databases. We'll also talk about things you should be talking to your developers about, things that you should know, why things are going on in your database, things that you should know so you can go back and say something. You can go, hey, I just found out about these features. And for the most part, your developers won't even probably know about those features. So you can kind of get some street cred from them. And then the last thing is just, I want to come out of this with just getting a better relationship from, that should say developers. So getting better relationships from with your developers. So again, please ask questions, comments. I'm always looking for, if I say something that you don't agree with, hey, speak up and we'll have a discussion about it. We have 75 minutes. So I am not a DBA. I have played a DBA on TV once in a while, but I am mostly a developer. I know enough about databases to be dangerous, but I like to have a good, knowledgeable DBA around who can help me. So, and for the most part, I've had good DBAs and database developers on my teams that do give me a good, that do help and create great solutions. So I do look like, I have looked like this in the past, and I was looking like this earlier today because I had some stuff I had to do. So, okay, so I'm here as a friend. I threw a bunch of these slides up trying to get some jokes, but clearly everyone's having food coma, so we're not laughing. So the big thing is, you know what? We're all in this together. I do it, like I said earlier, I do a talk that I do tomorrow for developers to help them understand more about the databases and about digging in and taking a look at their queries once they're over on the database side. And just because you get data from your database doesn't mean that it's the best and most optimized way to get that data from said database. But this is all about really teamwork and partnership. And I always like to throw in a dog picture, but in this case, I'm going to throw a dog and cat picture because we should be friends. And then, who knows Grant Fritchie, president of PASS. So I was talking to him a couple months ago, and he brought this term up. He said, trust and verify. And I think this goes both ways. We have to trust each other. So as a developer, I have to trust my DBAs that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they have to trust me that I'm supposed to be doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But to tell you the truth, you have to verify also, because I know what I have to do on the application side, and I know what's expected of the application. And that may not always be aligned with what the expectations are from the database side with the DBAs. So you have to verify both sides. Like I have to, if I'm running a report and I don't tell the DBA how fast that report I need it, I may not get the best query possibly. I may get a query that works, but I may not get a query that runs as efficiently, as fast as can be. So we have to do this trust and verify. So I was thinking about like what really happens with apps and data. And to tell you the truth, there's lots of different ways. If you didn't know this, you probably did, but there's lots of different ways that developers use data that you guys have in your databases. So, I mean, there's web apps, there's mobile apps, there's APIs, which are, and I kind of break down APIs into table-based APIs and domain APIs. So, table-based APIs are basically, I get stuff out of the database that really is in the shape of the tables that you guys have in your databases. It's the most common type of APIs. But we also have this new thing. Anyone heard of domain-driven development? So I can take, and this is how I build my APIs. I take the data out of the database, and I shape it in whichever way I want to, and I build my APIs not to reflect possibly not to reflect a one-on-one relationship with the database, because I'm creating and possibly using the data in different ways and in different shapes. So as a developer, I may not be, in the end, getting that data out that looks like what is in the database. So what you have to realize is that, especially with data science, we're taking data and we're crunching it and we're molding it into different ways, and you may see the end result and you may really question why the developers did that. And that comes back to trust and verify. You have to trust and you have to verify, but you can't trust blindly. You have to verify. So if I have an API or if I have an application that I join like parts of 3 tables together to make something as a new entity in my application, and you sit there and go, well, why did you create a new entity out of three tables, parts of 3 tables? Maybe we can go back to the database and do X, Y, Z. Maybe I can create a view or create something. So have this discussion with your developers. Watch what the application is doing. You may actually be able to help those developers build a better solution. So, anyone have comments at this point? Go ahead.
I'm listening to what you're saying, and it sounds like you're describing a scenario where DBA
So I sit down and I really, and this is me. This may not reflect the way that you view your job or you as a DBA. So there's different types of, there's almost different types of DBAs. Like I view there's DBAs that are infrastructure people. They set the databases up, they get them optimized, and then they let the developers do whatever they want with them. And that's fine if you have a good development team that you trust to build those queries well. But I also like, and I personally like to have database, I'll call them database developers, people that I can sit down and I can say, you know what, I can't build this query in C# entity framework in the LINQ statement. I need some help. Or, you know, I'm running this query and it's really slow and I need some help. So you may get that from time to time. Just be aware that your developers need that feedback from you also, because they may not always have the time or understanding to know what's going on with those queries and all SQL statements happening in your database. Anything else? Okay. So we're going to take a look at Entity Framework Core and LINQ. Has anyone ever looked at LINQ, the C#? Oh, okay, so a good amount. So I was hoping, so just bear with me. If you already know LINQ, then you just have to bear with it. So LINQ is this idea that I can build in a fluent way. I can build a query in C# and .NET and .NET Core. And in the old days, we would just take a string, build our select statement or whatever statement we were doing. We would throw it into a DB set and send it through ADO.NET. And that arised a lot of issues, primarily what issue caused when we were doing a lot of that stuff? Sql injection. So this is a different way to build this stuff, and it actually also compiles. So if it doesn't, if this LINQ statement doesn't meet the same requirements or it doesn't compile against the database, you get feedback right away. In the old days, I would write all this stuff and I would run it, and I was hoping that it would run and I wouldn't get an error back from the database. But now we have a strongly typed way to get these queries and other SQL statements done. So let's take a look at a little code. This is C#. So as you can see, I have just a little tiny application. What it does, if you take a look at the school context, that is, think of that in the EF Entity Framework Core is the connection to the database. So this is kind of what has a direct connection through a connection string back to the database. And we're going to use it to interact with our database and the data within it. So you can also see that we have this thing called var student with same name, and then I'm going to call it context.students. That's saying I'm going to work off of the student entity type. So think of entities in primarily, most of the time, entities will be correlated to a database table. So you'll have a student table in your database, and that relates to an entity class in .NET and called student. So in here, I'm going to say, go out to all of the students where the first name is equal to, and then I'm going to call this get name. So I'm going to call a function down below that returns Chris. And that will send that that name into the where clause, and then what's going to come out is a list of students. So kind of LINQ is a backwards, looking at LINQ is kind of backwards compared to how you're used to writing T-SQL. So like down below, the to list would be like a select whatever you want. And then you would have from is more that context dot students. And then you have traditionally, we have wheres and group bys and other things that look very much like what you're used to in T-SQL. So if I run this and I take a look at what is sent over to across the wire over the SQL server, it's that SQL statement. It's this select statement. So it's actually an exec, sp underscore exec SQL, and then it's a string. And in the string, because I have that where clause and I called that function, that actually will be set to a parameter, and then the parameter is created. I've had some feedback from somebody about, and we'll talk about the nvarchar 4000 in a few minutes. But at the end, we set that parameter and it gets sent across the wire. So that's actually what gets sent across the wire over to your SQL Server database engine. So if you've ever been curious how and why it does it, that's kind of the reason. And we'll take a look at a couple examples. So, but first I want to take a look at that when it creates that parameter, that underscore get name underscore 0, and it says nvarchar 4000. So Entity Framework Core, and it was Joe, right? Joe and I were talking at lunch. And that is really inefficient. Who thinks that's the most inefficient way to send over a parameter? I mean, it's huge. I think it's inefficient. But Entity Framework isn't smart enough at this point to know how big that parameter. So it's just gonna have a huge length for that nvarchar. Yeah. Well, it does know it's a string, because if you go back here, the function getName returns a string. So it does know that it's a string. If it was a date time, it would have created that parameter as a corresponding as a date time parameter before it was sent over. So it will know the difference. So if it's an int, it will create corresponding to what it knows in the application.
But the database field could have been a variable character.
It could have been a var. Yes, it could have been a var. But even vars, the compiler knows what that var is. Var is just simply, I don't want to have to type the variable type. So I can just say var and let the compiler figure it out behind the scenes. That's what var really means.
Oh, no, I mean a variable character. So if that's passing, it's assuming nvarchar archar 4000. But
Yeah.
if the field is actually varchar 4000, then it throws the implicit conversion, which we don't like.
Yeah, well, it just assumes that, and this is how it treats all strings. So it's not smart enough. Entity Framework at this point isn't smart enough to use anything different than at this point nvarchar. Yeah, all I know in talking to the team, is they just, when they see a string, they assume they use an nvarchar and varchar 4000, and it gets sent over. That's, yeah.
Does that not change if you use like maybe scaffolding or like a model creating annotation?
Not that I'm aware of. So those, so the data annotation is for validation. So I don't think, you know what, I will take a look at that because I assume that it would send over, but you know what? I'm gonna not assume anything. I will set up a little test tonight or tomorrow. Come find me, or I'll be around, or email me, and I will get feedback on that because it's a good question. I don't want to say yes or no without knowing 100%. Yeah. Yeah, I've never found that in any of the framework documentation, that you can actually change that and have it go to varchar. So that's why I haven't seen where you can actually set that in Entity Framework Core. Okay. Okay, well, I just haven't found it. So it's pretty big, but I'll take a look at that. Okay, so we have another one. So this one does a include. So in LINQ, I can come in here and say, I want all of the students, and I want to include the, in this case, the grades. So it's kind of like a join. But we don't do explicit joins. We just say this dot include, and this is what you get behind the scenes. Now, in this case, we don't have for the first name, and I set it to Mary. We actually, that doesn't get set to a parameter in the string that gets sent across the wire, because I'm actually explicitly adding Mary as a string in that LINQ statement. So it doesn't set up a parameter on that side. So just FYI about that. But these includes will cause a left join to happen. So the last one is we can do double includes. So I can say, give me students. And again, I'm going to give a first name of Bill, and I want not only the grades, but I want the courses that the student took. And what gets sent across the wire now is actually two SQL statements that get called at the same time. So this is actually what gets sent across the wire all at once. It doesn't break it up into two calls. This is just one call to the database with two select statements. So EF Core actually does a much better job than EF6. I used Entity Framework 6 or some of the .NET Framework versions of Entity Framework, and in the beginning they were horrible in their creation of queries and SQL statements. But they have gotten pretty good, and they're doing a much better job. And we'll take a look at some of the features on how you can do a much better job than Entity Framework if you need to. So the other thing I talked about with Grant, and I'm also of this opinion. He and I talked about this thing of not using ORMs as an ORM and not an OOM. So OOM is object-oriented modeling. And I'll explain what the difference is by what any framework can do with code and databases. So there's different ways that we can interact and use Entity Framework Core and also Entity Framework if you're still working with 6. And there's pros and cons. So the original way that we used to do Entity Framework back 8, 9, 10 years ago is we would have a database, we would generate what we call an entity data model, and that would be called an EDMX file. And that was basically just a bunch of XML that described the database. And that would then, we could write code that went against that EDMX. Wasn't great because I still had to write all my code and all the entity stuff, and I had to do a lot of stuff by hand. So they came out with two other ways to do it at a later point. The one I love is what I call DB code first, is we have a database, and and that database is controlled by a DBA or done beforehand. So it's fully optimized, fully indexed. It should be done, as much done as possible. And we run and we interrogate that database with Entity Framework Core using a scaffolding type of CLI, and that creates all the code that we need for our application. So it creates all the entity models based on your tables, and it also creates this DB context. It's kind of like a description of the entire database, including associations. It knows what the primary keys are in the tables, so it kind of knows if they're self-generated or if those primary keys are set, or have to be set by the application, what types they are, so if they're GUIDs or integers or whatever. So, and that's the way I build my applications, and that's really how I recommend people to build theirs, is have a fully mature database and then build your application on top of it. But we do have this thing called code first, and what this does is you write the code, and Entity Framework creates a database based on the code that you write. Anyone deal with development teams that do this? It's horrible. So I actually side with the DBAs, and I tell people don't do this. If your development team ever says we're going to use code first migrations, you basically say, I'm not going to support this database. I'm not going to support this project, because they're taking all the power out of the DBA's hands, and they're going to create the most horrible database known to man. Yes?
I was just doing a full-site course on MVC the other day, and the guy said that code first was the only supported model in Entity Framework 2.2.
No, that you can do the middle one. Nope, he was wrong. So you tell me who the author. I probably know who the author is, and I'll go hit him with a 2x4, because it's not correct. Code first migrations is horrible. It shouldn't be done, because as a developer, I don't know what should and shouldn't be indexed. It's not correct enough to go, hey, anything in the where clauses of my queries should have an index. That's not right or wrong. I mean, you could be over-indexing and hurting your database. So anyone who does code first migration, you can have them call me. You call me, and I'll come and I'll set your teams right. It shouldn't be done. Microsoft is 100% wrong when they created this, and they have caused so many issues with projects. Yeah.
So, I mean, as the DBA, like saying no is like one of the best.
Yes.
But, like, because code first is so much easier for developers to understand and implement and all that kind of stuff, what's the nice way to convince them to not do that without just saying no?
Well, you let them run it, and then you go back and go, hey, let's take a look at query performance. But here's the thing. Here's what you really say is basically they want to create an app that self-generates a database. You go back to them and go, well, you know, I'm going to create a database, and that database is going to self-create the application. Is that right? That's my argument. I've actually told people that. I said, should a DBA have the ability to create a database and just go, you know what, the application isn't that important. I'll just have something generate the application, and we'll just go on with it. No, they would never go for that. So why should a DBA allow for a database that has no design, no development to it? So unless they know what they're doing, I've seen very few teams actually know how to use code first to do a database correctly. So, okay, so enough of that. I'll come off my soapbox. So the next thing is, someone yesterday, I was talking to someone, and they have a lot of issues with their development teams around transactions with Entity Framework Core. So I'm going to tell you I'm going to give you some code examples, but in the end, you're going to understand what Entity Framework does with transactions. So here's a code example that I have. That using at the top uses a transaction. Basically, think of that as a script that has a begin transaction and an end transaction. And that's what really this is doing. You can see down below we have that transaction.complete. So what this is doing is saying, oh, I'm going to wrap all this code up into a transaction that starts at the beginning and then it ends at the end. And what we do in here is we get 2 users and we change those users, and then we call save changes, which throw those changes into the DB context. They queue them up, and then we do the transaction complete. And you think that will go in and finalize that transaction, but this isn't the right way to use transactions in Entity Framework. One is you don't need to have 2 save changes because, like I said, it queues them up. So this is really what you should be doing. And actually, you don't even need that first save changes. Only the second save changes is needed, because if I come in and I change something about user A, I change the name, and then in the user B, I change 28. Both those changes have been pushed out to the DB context. In this case, it's called database. So that database has those 2 changes inside of it, queued up, ready to go. And when the save changes happens, that actually will wrap a transaction around both of those internal changes. And so imagine we didn't have that first save changes. So we just said user A.name equals admin, user B.age equals 28, and then we did the same changes. If somehow the second transaction, so say you had some kind of constraint on age, and age could only be up to 25. And so that failed because it was constraint, some kind of constraint in the database. So it said 28, it fails. It would actually, Entity Framework smart enough to know to roll back the admin also. So you don't need to have these explicit transactions in your code anymore. So if your development team lets you kind of go through code reviews, and you take a look at code and you start seeing that they're wrapping stuff in transactions, just let them know that they don't need transactions. They really need to understand Entity Framework Core a little bit more, and that DB context.save changes will wrap a transaction around any changes that it has that hasn't been pushed out to the database. So instead of this, so you can, I mean, in your scripts, I'm not saying in your T-SQL scripts you can't have a begin transaction end. I'm just saying in this code, when they're kicking off a transaction and then completing at the end, this is unnecessary. That code in C#. Because what they're doing is they're wrapping a transaction around another transaction, and you're affecting the performance of your application. Okay, so I broke up some of these EF Core features. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Can we say that what you just said about transactions is analogous to writing a query where every query is a transaction, but you don't need to explicitly wrap it in one unless you want to do something special, like maybe roll back in case of an error or some other kind of conditional logic. I guess what I'm saying is it analogous? And also, if you want to do some sort of conditional logic or rollback, would you then need to use a using statement?
No, so think of that. Let's go back here. Think of that database variable. See up top, it says new database context. So basically, that is the connection to your database. But it also holds all of the changes that are occurring when you change things that are associated with it. So when I come in and do all these save changes and stuff, it actually is smart enough to know, oh, I have all these changes, and I'm going to, everything that is that I haven't sent to the database yet, I actually am going to wrap in a transaction myself behind the scenes. And if it fails, I'm going to roll it all back. So to be honest with you, my recommendation is every change, I wrap everything in my code, so I'm only changing one thing at a time. I'm not doing a bunch of changes and then pushing them all out to the database, because for me, I don't want them to have a big transaction around. If I do 10 changes, I want each one to be pushed against the database explicitly, and not 10 all at once. So if the 8th or 9th one fails, it rolls back everything else. Sometimes you want it. Sometimes you want the ability, some applications want the ability to go back and undo changes. And that depends on the requirements of your application. That's true. So in that case, you just have to be really careful on how you do it. You still don't need you don't need to wrap the transactions around everything. EF Core is smart enough to know how to handle all that behind the scenes. So, okay, so I have some EF Core features I want you guys to know about. Some that will help you as a DBA, and some that you can go back and tell your development team about that will help them, that will make you look very smart. So, and that's what I want you guys to go back and look smart in front of your developers, so they'll take you out for beers and buy you lunch and all that good stuff. Because Nate, haven't I bought you lunch before? Yes. So Nate used to be he was the best DBA I've ever worked with. So if you want to know more, ask me afterwards. So we have this ability to do string interpolation in raw SQL. All that really means is we have the ability now not to have to do LINQ on everything. I can actually send over raw SQL. I can send over a string that contains my SQL statement, select statement in this case. Anyone have a problem with this? I know, select star evil, yes. Besides the select star, anyone have issue with this? What's this remind people of?
Well, I mean, it could grow really big as well, right? You could have, I don't know, 1 million customers in one city.
You could. But does this look like the old SQL injection that we used to have? Well, it's not. They actually solved that problem. And you know what? From now on, I will not put select star in there because in the title I said removing select star. So I will put down the correct projection and explicitly put down everything that I want in that from that customer table. Okay, so if we take a look at this code, we see up here that we have a variable called city, and we're setting that to Redmond. And then in here, we have this from SQL, and then we're going to send it this string, and we have city wrapped in curly brackets. And what that is telling Entity Framework is use this parameter inside this select statement when we're sending it over. So the select statement, or the what gets sent across the wire, is this. It actually sets up a parameter and then creates that parameter and then sets the parameter before it sends it over across the wire. What's that?
You can specify that it's a bar chart instead of an in-bar chart.
Okay, well, good. See, I don't know everything, so I do these talks, so I learn from the collective. All you put together, you're a lot smarter than I am. So, so see what that's doing. So I like this because if I can't write a query, I can go to Nate or any of you guys and go, I'm having a hard time writing this query in LINQ. Please give me this query. Or if Nate already created this elegant select statement, and I don't want to spend the time to create that in LINQ because I'm on a deadline, I'm time is money, I'll just throw it into this from SQL, or from SQL, and then send it off across the wire because it's already the most elegant select statement because Nate created it that way. So this can help your development teams. Most developers don't know about this feature. I do a lot of developer talks where I talk about all these great features in Entity Framework Core, and most people don't know about this. So in the end, what actually gets run against the database is that select statement. So yeah, that is, I find that DBAs, once they get over the fear that this is SQL injection, that they actually like this feature because it gives them the ability to write these queries that can be optimized against their own database. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So what is it about this that prevents SQL injection? Why can't you just tackle another string in there that says drop data?
Well, I mean, we hope that your application, you're not allowing people, that you're checking what is going in the city.
There's actually two checks. So SQL does it as well.
Okay.
Parameter.
Okay. Yeah.
And the app layer has its own check, right? Making sure you don't just freeform Redmond.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Yeah. It's not, because it's sending it across as a parameter, it's actually doing some checks on the database side.
The way it used to be done was just straight.
Straight SQL, yes. Yeah, it was just merging two strings together or multiple strings together, and it just sent that across a wire explicitly. Yes?
How does the from SQL work within the context of the customer DB set? Like, what if you wanted to do all of that?
Oh, you can put joins in there, whatever it does.
The DB set that you do from SQL is relevant?
I don't understand the question.
Because you have context.customers.from SQL.
Yeah, so what you have to remember is when I write this SQL statement, this query, whatever's coming out of that query has to match the shape of customer. So I can't send back something, say customer is first name, last name, middle name, age, and a customer ID. So it has 5 fields. I can't come back and say select first name, last name, and that's it. Actually, Entity Framework will give you an error because what's coming back doesn't match the shape of your customer entity class in C#. So actually, that's why I did a select star, because I need all of the columns in the customer table, because they all match up to all the properties in my customer C# class that they're going into. So. Yeah. Yeah, it's, yes. Nope, it needs to be in the context of the shape, the same number of parameters and the same types and everything coming in across the wire. So I can't have a subset. If I have a table that's 100 columns and say that's called table XYZ, and I have a class in my C# application that's called XYZ, and that matches 1-to-1 between the 100 columns to 100 properties, I can't pull out 50 of them and push them into the customer, because it's not the same shape, because there's a bunch of other properties I'm missing. So Entity Framework is going to raise an error and say type mismatch. Yeah. So in the old days, we used to have no way. Entity Framework was very poor with the ability to work with stored procedures. This is one way that you can do you can call stored procedures, with the caveat that we just talked about, that get the stored procedure, get most popular blogs, the result set from that stored procedure has to match the shape, the type that's in the blog entity C# class. So if you have that, but if you have some mix of a bunch of different tables, and I forget the name. What's the result set? I thought there was never mind. But it needs to match up 1-to-1. So I couldn't send back most popular blogs and then add another field on there from another table. It would blow up because it would be a type mismatch. But this is one way. If you go back and you want your teams to use store procedures instead of maybe explicit SQL statements or LINQ, and as long as they match up, you build your stored procedures to match up with your entity models, you can use the from SQL functionality in Entity Framework Core. So, yes. Native not supported but works over, yeah, okay. Yeah, you're gonna get me on grammar, I know. So, no, it's fine. I'll clean that up. But thank you. I will remember that.
But on that previous slide, so is this a way to, if you did have 100 columns, but I only want to return 3 of them, could you create a stored procedure that only returns?
I could create a stored procedure that creates some result set that was maybe 4 or 5 tables put together in a certain order. But what I would have to do is create a new entity type in Entity Framework Core that matched what the result set was coming back from that stored procedure. So it can be done. You just have to create the new class inside C#, inside .NET Core to handle that, to be able to accept that data in the shape that's coming from the stored procedure. Yes? So like updates, those are fine. Those are fine because you can, if I'm gonna do like a delete, if I have a delete, and as long as I don't get an exception coming back from SQL Server, then that from SQL will just not have a result set and it'll go on and be fine. Well, I mean, I would send in I could add on a .where clause in here. So I could say execute dbo.delete blog, and then have another line that said .where, and then set whatever the blog ID equals to whatever I want, whatever blog I'm deleting. So you can do that. If you want to see example, I can show you example. I just didn't put it into my slide deck, but I'll remember that's good to know. Okay, query types. Query types are this functionality that now I can use Entity Framework Core to work on views without primary key, with primary key, or yeah, views without primary keys, tables without primary keys, queries defined in the model. We might take a look at that, but that's kind of from the developer side. And then it also serves as the return type for some from SQL queries. So if you're using a lot of views, you can create some code, or your developers now can create code to work with those views. So this view blog post counts. So this view has 2 properties. It has a blog name and a post count. I have to explicitly set that new type up in C# that matches the view. Not you when you have Entity Framework go through your code through scaffolding, it's called automatic scaffolding, where it will create those classes for you. It will not create views for you automatically. You have to do that by hand. So in here, if you set this code up to now work with views, I have to explicitly by hand create that class that the view data will come out and be used in my application. Everyone, okay, go ahead.
What about a value that's, if set column is null or not null? Do you have to specifically call it as null here, or is it just know that either this comparative where the value comes back?
Yeah, so nulls can come back as nulls. So, yep, it doesn't matter. So it'll come back if if you have a null in like a, yeah, it shouldn't really matter because most times I use just nulls for like strings, and then, but for integers, if a null comes back, I know it will come back and it'll be set as a, what be set as a null? It should be set as a, probably as a 0 because int can't be set as an int type and C# can't be set to null. So. Oh yeah, the optional, the question mark, so yes. Thank you for catching my mistakes. So query tags. I think if people don't yell and scream and jump for joy when I show you, anyone know any framework core query tags? Has anyone heard of these? Who's had this scenario? I know Nate has. So now I'm gonna tell a story from Nate. So we were working on this big project. Nate, every once in a while, Nate would come back and go, hey, there's a query in the database and it is not running, it's not running right. I know how to fix it, but I don't know where it's coming from in the application. Right, Nate? We've had that. And he would come to me or our team and we would go, okay, well, give me some time and we'll we'll try to find where that query is being called. And hours or days or whenever it took, we would find that query and we would sit down and fix it. Who would want a better way of handling that going forward? Okay. What if I could just say tag with, add a tag with in my LINQ statement, or to go with my from query calls, and you would get that in your logs in your database. Isn't this, just this feature should give all DBAs, like every DBA in this conference should know about this. Yeah, let me go back. So you can add as many tag widths. So this is how I build my LINQ statements now. I always give the first tag width is a description of what I'm doing with this LINQ statement. The second one is a fully, if no one knows what this is, it's basically, it's called the namespace. And this is saying that this is the project, and then it's a fully indexed or a fully explained kind of breadcrumb trail, yes. So it's saying Chinook in the controllers, in the album controller, and in the index, and this is MVC, in the index action. So, and then I'm gonna put down here, I always put down if there's any parameters that get sent through this. Just know that you can't use string interpolation to build out these strings. So I can't say parameters and then add in a custom parameter type or a custom parameter value or a variable value in here yet. They're trying to work on that. So what gets sent across is you get these comments coming across that get logged with the query, the select statement that gets sent to be done on the database side. So this is really big. This should be used whenever you're using Entity Framework Core. This feature is not available in Entity Framework 6, only in Entity Framework Core, so sadly. But yeah, this is when I discovered this, I was like, wow, this is big. So, and actually Grant Fritchie and I created blog posts. So I blogged about query tags, and then he blogged about extended events in SQL Server that leveraged that could find these query tags and then raise events up based on when a query wasn't running well, it could go back. He found out a way to go back in the comments and find out where these query tags were happening, or getting the details out of the query tags out of the comments. Okay, so those are two features that we have about 15 minutes left, so we've got plenty of time. So let's quickly go through some features that you can go back to your developers and help them make better applications. So the first one is we have this way to do DB context. So it's just know that right now we have this thing called the Dependency Injection container in .NET Core, and it's where things get pushed in and pushed into this container that other parts of the application can pull out and use. And we do this with DB context, these database connections in our application. So whenever I need a new one, whenever I need to get a database connection and use it, I'm just going to grab one out of the dependency injection container. It gets created and handed off to the application. So if I call the database, if I call and I need 1 million updates to my database, I'm going to actually get 1 million of these DB contexts created by the application. But DB context pooling will do this feature where it will create an initial set of, it's like DB connection pooling, if anyone knows about that. But this is actually, will create a number of these DB contexts inside the container, and these are already created. And I can now pull, and it will pull those out of that pool and use them. And when they're done, they go back in the pool. So I'm not creating all these objects over and over again. Your application will run a lot quicker. I'm getting about 25% performance gains by just doing DB context pooling. And you can get this slide deck. I'll have the PAS people update this talk's slide deck to include all this. But if you go back, you can just tell your people it's as easy as just changing a call in their code. Instead of add DB context, they just will have to say add DB context pool, and they'll get this DB context pooling capability. So just if you go back and tell your development team, hey, are you doing DB context pooling? You'll be, they'll probably appreciate the knowledge and the information. So what should you ask your app devs? Now these are questions that I think you should ask. I want to hear what questions you ask your app devs also. So these are some of the questions that I think DBA should ask. So ask about internal level of support, level of service, expected uptime, because I think this at least will give you an idea, one, if they're even thinking about it. If they have a blank look on their face, then at least you'll get them a discussion to talk about what all this means. The other is, if they do give you some of this information, it will give you an idea size of databases, where these databases can live, where they can exist, maybe different versions, if it doesn't need an enterprise edition, or if it can use a web edition of SQL Server. And that's the other thing, is ask about like if it needs enterprise SQL Server, because enterprise is much more expensive, right, than the other editions. The other ones, I always like to be asked if we're going to use any SQL-centric products like SSIS or any of the other SSAS and stuff like that. Is the database storing or processing privileged data? Everyone should be asking that because of privacy laws now, especially if you're dealing with European countries. And then if there's any other interface, if this is interfacing to any other systems, and then just how much storage they need, what environments need to be created for this solution. Do we need development, a QA, and then production, or do we just need QA and production, stuff like that? And then what are the expectations around data or disaster recovery? Does anyone have any other questions that they ask their developer teams?
Archiving strategy, because they'll like create these logging tables and like just slam it into data.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, how long are we gonna keep this? Question.
Thank you. I'll put that down. Anything else? Or any of these questions you don't think are necessary? Yeah, that's good.
Sometimes it's a surprise once they move that to production. They're like, wait a second, people are actually using it, it's not working.
Yeah. We didn't have any of those issues, did we, Nate? No, none of those. None of those issues. So yeah, that's all great. So I'll put that one into load testing. So that's awesome. Most people don't do that. So that's great. Okay, so we have about 8 minutes left. What do you want to know? Do you have any other questions? Because I'm kind of done with the talk at this point, but we can have a little discussion. Is there any gripes that you have about your development team that you've always wanted to ask someone but was too afraid to ask? Why? Why'd you do this? Yeah, sometimes you can say why. I mean, we're only human. That's the thing. If you partner with your development team in the very beginning, you're not going to have a lot of whys because you're going to go as a team and they're going to go, hey, I need this done. What do you suggest? Because if you don't work with them, you're just going to get a lot of technical debt at the end, and you're going to say, why'd you do this, and why'd you do that, and why'd you do this? And they're going to go, I don't know, it's how I've always done it, or it's how I read a Stack Overflow post, or I read an article that said do it this way, or I saw this guy named Woody tell me to do it in a talk. I mean, that's the thing. You have to work with your people. So anything else? Again, trust and verify. Have a great day. Please do evaluation for this and all of your sessions. And then if you need to get a hold of me, my Twitter handle is just cwoodruff. If you want to follow me, if you want to email me, it's cwoodruff@live.com. So I'll be hanging out here or outside for a little bit after the talk, or I'll be just walking around for the rest of the day and until Friday afternoon. So appreciate it. Everyone have a great conference, and there's about 5 minutes left, so get you out early. Thank you.